another song.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, both here in the Doretha Wynn Edgecombe Children's Board Family Resource Center, which is a lot to say when you answer the phone. But we are so happy to have the namesake here with us today. So again, my name is Tahisha Scott, and I'm the director of the Children's Board Family Resource Center, which are proudly funded by the Children's Board, but even more proudly managed by Lutheran Services Florida. Okay, and here with us today, we have some very important people in the room. Doretha Wynn Edgecombe herself. And then also we have Karen Brett. Okay. And Ms. Edgecombe, I love you with my whole heart. But I am so happy to have here with us. Okay. Walter Whitfield. Yes. And the reason why that is so important is because today we will be discussing Dr. King's dream with someone that was right there at the start, that has lived a life following Dr. King's dream, someone that is still in the work and a rising star for the future. And so that's why today is so important. But we want to start off with a song. And there's one more person that I'm going to introduce in the end, but we will save the true best for last. But we want to start off with the song. So for those in our LSF land that are watching with us, Miss Mayrose, I'm joking. So we actually have here Megan, who is our program outreach specialist with the Children's Board Family Resource Center, and she will be accompanying us as we sing Lift Every Voice and Sing. Megan?
And we stand.
Absolutely, as we stand.
Till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought. Facing the rising sun, of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
And to MC our panel for today, we have Dr. Marissa Martinez, who is the CBFRC Center Manager for the Doretha Wynn Edgecombe Center. Marissa, thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us in 3D as well as virtually. Most of all, thank our panel who has traveled to be here, who has gotten an exemption today from work to join us. And I thank you all for the privilege of your time and for spending an hour with us. So without further ado, because you all really want to hear from our panel and not from me, I would like to begin with a series of questions that we will pass around our panel so that we can gain insight as to the life work, the mission, and the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King and how that is exemplified in our everyday lives. So our first question, how has Dr. King's legacy influenced your life?
Oh, thank you. First of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to share this celebration with you. And you're right, the Ridge Edgecombe Resource Center is a mouthful. But one of the things that I used to do when the center for us first opened is I would just call to hear them say Dorito Wynn Edgecombe Resource Center. And so they were always gracious in that. But let me get to the question and share with you my own personal interaction with Dr. King. When I was a student at Talladega College, Talladega, Alabama, during the time of the civil rights and Jim Crow, Dr. King visited our school. It was a small college, only about 700 or 800 students. But he came as a way to inspire and encourage us because we were going to protest the beating of one of our schoolmates. He had come home after the Christmas break, and he sat in the all-white waiting room, and he was brutally beaten by 4 or 5 men who said he had no business sitting there. Ironically, the law had changed that said that there should be no discrimination in certain facilities, and that included train stations and bus stations. So he had a right to do that. So he was so brutally beaten that the students decided to do a protest march. Dr. King came, spoke to us. And if I can think of one highlight of my college experience, that was the opportunity to see him, touch him, to be a part of that particular space and time. We marched, but interesting, in those days, nonviolence was the way that we approached the civil rights movement. And so we were introduced to how to fall so that we wouldn't hurt ourselves, how to try to avoid being hit, how to avoid the force of the water hose and of the dogs as much as we could. So the students there marched, and of course we were met with bitter words and racial kinds of words, bitter kinds of attitude, but that didn't stop us. Some of our students, some of my fellow students were arrested. I did not. Interestingly, my parents called and they heard about the fact that we were going to do it. And they said, you know you will not do it. I said, of course, Mom, of course, Dad. I hung up the phone and got in the line. So there was no stopping us. But that was what I think the legacy of his life, the sacrifices that he made, the myriad of accomplishments all played a point in my life that in some way I felt like Dr. King, that I needed to be part of the solution, that if things were going to be right, I had to be part of making that right.
Hello. To start off with a greeting. But to answer to your question, Miss Marissa, how his legacy influenced me. Dr. King has taught me through his speeches that I can be anything I want to be in my life. He said if a man called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep the streets like Michelangelo, a painter, or Shakespeare who wrote poetry. He had made me understand that I can be great, and this influenced me to continue my education at Garriott High School, and I plan to attend a college after graduating and follow my dream to become an architect.
Wow.
Hello, I just want to say that I'm just honored to be here. And listen, this is so much history. Dr. King influenced my life. I can recall as a young youngster hearing his speeches. And it was just like a calling to me. He impressed upon me that my duty was to serve. My duty was to be better than. My duty was each one teach one. And because of those words, it always inspired me. To this day, I know in our community, the challenges and the generational traumas that have been, bestowed on our on African Americans, on the African American family and community. And so I'm charged with instilling in my students. I've been teaching for 25 years, and I know as a product of the 70s, because I came up in the 70s, we were taught that Black was beautiful. We were taught that you had to be better than. And our generation today, sadly, they don't get those messages. And so, as just part of his legacy, I feel that it is my duty to make sure that every student that stands before me understands their greatness and make sure that not only are they great for themselves, they are great for the people that come behind them. And so that is the power of his legacy in my life.
I think that's a great segue into our next question, Karen. So how do you take all of this history, all of this knowledge, all of these lived experiences, and ensure that younger generations also carry on Dr. King's message?
I think the best way to do that is to live his message, not just to talk about it or to have kids learn the have a dream speech, because primarily that's the way they are introduced to them. But there's so much about the value of his life that we have the responsibility to share it with them. Not just the speech, not just some of the bits of of his accomplishments, but I think the best way, more than anything, is to live it, to be part of the solution, to continue to tell the stories. And I think some of the quotes are magnificent ways to introduce students to them, because it gives you an insight into the values in which you believe. It gives you insight of the things that he held in high esteem. And I think so, putting aside the I Have a Dream speech and dig into some of the fantastic, impactful, inspiring quotes that he's given to us over time, lasting quotes. That's one of the ways that I think that we can do it. One, live the messages, live the dream, and share his words through his quotes.
I believe one of the ways that we can do it is going back, like you were saying,
Edgecombe.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I can agree with you on that. Like, have the students review, all the kids review the information documents that what we still have right now. That way we can still show them what we've learned, show them what he's done for us, what steps he took, and how he's gotten us this far. I think it's a perfect way to get them to review it, go back, and we all have a sit-down conversation and discuss on it, and moving forward to get them to see how they want to progress on their life and how they can take his memories and take it with them as they go on with their journey.
I think something like this whole panel is really, really important. One of the things I stress, especially for Black History Month, history is his story. And I urge my students to go back and speak to their grandparents and parents, because a lot of what they see, they are so far removed from. And when they realize that history was something that really happened to people, that affect them, it makes a difference. It makes it so much more real. And then you'll even learn a little bit more than what you heard in the textbooks or what what you learned at school. And then it becomes so much more real. And of course, the students can, our young people can then discern the difference back then to where it is now. And then, start making changes. But it has to be real. It has to be real for them. So, like I said, one of the things I truly urge is they talk to, if they don't have grandparents, that they reach out to, but they can speak to someone in the community. But they have to know that these things really happen. Because if they don't know their history, it's bound to repeat itself.
This time I want to remember to give it to you.
So with learning history, with sharing not just the dream, but really the long-term impact that Dr. King has left, the legacy that will continue on, what hope do you have for the future to continue to carry on Dr. King's legacy?
Do you want me to be honest?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sometimes I feel pretty hopeless. When I look around and see what I lived through, and I'm going to tell my age, but you can tell from my gray hair. In the 60s, I heard you talk about the 70s, and here you are in 2025. There's not the big difference that I think Dr. King dreamed of. I think he was optimistic. I think he believed that the impact of the civil rights movement would have a long-lasting impact. But the world has changed, and sometimes not for the better. And so with that in mind, we've got a bigger challenge. We aren't going to stop fighting. We can't afford to stop fighting because a young man like Walter, who has a place to make history and of his own. And we've got to be the role model for doing that. And so as pessimistic and hopeless as I sometimes feel when I meet young men like this, and I've known Karen for a long time, and I know the kind of wisdom and impact and force and persistence that she has, maybe we can change America. Not so much through me, but through young people like Walter. And so what I say to you, no matter how far you fall, there's more greater for you to get up and make a difference. And that's what I'm going to beg you, challenge you to be the voice, to be the example, to be the leader for the next generation, because we can't do without you.
Thank you, Ms. Edgecombe. To answer that question, my hope for the future is to know that even though we are still working to do in the areas of racism in this country, we still have come a long way. In my lifetime, I have witnessed Black presidents and Vice President, President Obama and Vice President Kamala Harris, or Kamala.
Well, I too, I have to say, it's been tough for me as a product of the 70s, especially in these last few years, because I was raised, like Mrs. Edgecombe stated. Oh no. I was raised that, we're building to keep building. And this has been the first time in my life that I've seen rights taken away. And so it's been a challenge. I'm going to be honest, it's been a challenge. But when I think about who Dr. King was, I remember he was mortal. He was not a superman. He was a person who put on his pants just like you and I. And the power and the influence that he had to change a world with just his belief and being who he was and having the courage that he had gives me hope. So I feel if it starts with us, it starts with each person. I tell my babies, I'm sorry, all my children are my babies. So I tell my babies that you never know who's looking at you. You never know who is learning from you. You might be the light in your house, in your community, but it's going to have to start with you. And so that is what gives me hope. If I can be the best version of me that I can each day and teach my babies to be the best versions of themselves, somewhere along the line, there's going to be hope. So that's what keeps me going.
Thank you. We needed that today. Ms. Edgecombe, you touched upon the civil rights movement, and what are some victories since the civil rights movement that inspire you to continue pushing for equality, to continue teaching younger generations about the impact of historical knowledge, historical experiences?
In some ways, Walter has already touched on some of them. We've had a Black president, a Black vice president, two Supreme Court justices, one beginning with third Marshall, and now we've got a female Black on the Supreme Court. We've got many of the discriminatory laws that we had, or what was the way of life in the 60s and before, they've all changed in many ways. We've got legislation that has given us the right in many ways to live equally in our country. But now that doesn't seem to be the attitude or the perception and actually the reality that we are equal. And so the battle continues. We've had all kinds of victories. In my own personal life, I've had the opportunities that my mother didn't have, or my parents didn't have. My daughter has had some different ones. And some of you sitting in this audience today, and those listening in, I suspect that you can talk about the victories that you have seen and have been a part of, and maybe even be a part of in terms of making the change here in Tampa and in our communities. And that's what I think is going to continue to make the victories in our lives. That every one of you will find your purpose in doing this. We can't do it without each other. And so our differences can be minimized by what we have in common. And so what I think is the biggest victory for me in my whole life is to see that some of Dr. King's dreams have come to fruition, but it's not enough. We've got to continue the fight.
I have seen many victories in the LGBTQ community where it's given them rights to be who they are, but also be able to be married.
Some victories since the civil rights movement. One of the things I want to say is, as Mrs. Edgecombe stated, the fight continues. I would just want to preface it by saying the fight continues because so many right now are just kind of on the chopping block. I am a first generation college student. And that was a big deal in my family and was able to give, my children some stability. And so, the doors that were open to me, I noticed for some students, it's just not that easy because of the finance difficulties, because of, they just don't start on the equal playing field. And so I hate to think that, my generation may have had it easier than the next generation because of so many things that are at play right now. So honestly, the fight continues. But during Dr. King's time and now, there's a plethora of wonderful accomplishments that we've been able to do in the community. Such as seeing our first Black president and vice president as stated. But, like I said, there's just so much work still left to do to ensure that everybody has an equal playing field when it's time to move this country forward.
How has the understanding of Dr. King's dream evolved within your own family?
I'm not so sure that my parents spent a lot of time talking about it, but more importantly, living it. Talking about or showing kindness, respect, that whole intent of being of service. That was just an expectation in my family, that if you were given the opportunity, then you ought to do it better for somebody else. You should be a role model for them in terms of what it looks like to be successful, not just defining it, but again, living it. And so when I talk about the fight, of course, we are talking about a physical fight. Everybody understands that, right? Okay. But I am talking of the fight for equality, for justice. We've got a homeless population in our community that deserves better. And that's an opportunity for us to be of service. We can't do it all, but we can find, as I said before, our purpose, and then getting other people involved, inspiring them, encouraging them. And if we look around and see what little things we can do, as Dr. King says, that little things can become, that's not the exact quotation, but we can do little things to become great things. And so in my family, I think it was the encouragement of going to college, coming out, graduating. That was the second greatest thing, other than that Dr. King is graduating from college. So that was a great achievement. But once I got out, I knew that I had to find a way to continue to make a difference. And that difference didn't have to be fantastic, or it didn't have to be on the front page of the paper. But the difference was my own self-worth, that I knew that I had done something to make or change somebody's life in some small way.
My parents, they always strive better for us. I am the oldest child out of 3. My mother and my father, they gave everything they did just to be able to provide for us to have a better life. And my mother and my sister did not get to make it today, but the reason why I did this because I wanted to be a better role model. I wanted to show that my sister that if she continues down the line with what she does, she'll be able to strive for what she wants. She always comes up with different things what she wants to be later on in life. And I just wanted to be that role model for her, that her older brother is going to go to college. Because my mother is the first generation that went to college, and now she's in medicine. She does with medical. She's at Tampa General, working there, analyzing data, doing stuff there. While my dad is a truck driver, making money like that. But I wanted to be that role model for my sister because she's on the things. And my brother's a year apart from me, and me and him grew up together. My little sister didn't have that. But I wanted to be that bigger role model, show her that, yes, if you continue down the path, you'll be able to get where you want to be. And I just wanted to prove that to her, but not just to her, to myself, and for other younger generations like me.
So Dr. King's dream evolved in my own family with my children. I have a daughter and two boys, two young men now. And so one of the things that I did to make sure that we live his dream is just an expectation, you know, as Ms. Edgecombe stated, in our house, it is expected that you do your best. Nobody says anybody is perfect. There's no perfect person walking this earth, but we expect your best. Next is to give back. When you see someone who needs help, it is expected. It's not asked, it's expected that you help everyone else out as well. You know, like I said, each one teach one. Next, one thing that I loved watching was, to me, was the first generation where our babies saw everyone as equal. If you were my friend, you were my friend. You were not my Black friend, you were not my Asian friend, you were my friend. And that is how our children came up. They saw people as people. And so as adults now, I'm honored. I love watching them and them making their mark in this world, because I have a son who's in the military, and now he's in management. And this is his first time. He never thought he'd be there, but this is his first time. You know, when you're in the military, you get voluntold to do things, and he got voluntold to, be in a management situation. So he has people underneath him, and it just I love hearing how he pushes his people and how he expects the best from them and how he speaks life into them. He doesn't cut anybody down. He builds you up. And the same with my other son. He's a pilot and engineer and all this other good stuff. But that's not what I'm most proud of. I'm proud of the person he is. That if he graduated from Blake, anyone at any time, he's a math person. They can call him. He will Zoom with you. He will mentor. That is how this dream has evolved in my family. Not only are they my children, they are the community's children. And so that's just that's the expectation.
So how can we take these wonderful expectations and this wonderful advice, as you're speaking to those virtually, as you're speaking to the audience that those virtually can't see, what advice would you give to everyone to take the principles of Dr. King, those nonviolent principles, and embody those and live those daily?
As I listen to Karen, one of the things that I want to be sure is that young people don't forget that there was a big fight, a tremendous sense of sacrifice, that people gave up their lives, that people were denied, and that with all of the privileges that they have today, that they just didn't happen. There were generations of people, even before my time, who had an understanding that they knew very well that what their place was, but they weren't satisfied at being in that place. And so because of the sacrifices, their willingness to push forward, to be beaten, to be killed, to be ignored, to be discriminated against, all were given as part of the journey to where we are now. So we can't ever forget that part of our history or American history. And I always say to the world that Black history is American history. And one of the things that we need to do is not wait until Black History Month in February or Martin Luther King month day to talk about the accomplishment that African Americans have made for this country to make it what it is. What was the question?
That was the answer.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad I
So what was the question? I'm sorry.
So how do we take the principles of Dr. King, the nonviolent principles? What advice would you give to those in the audience, those virtually, to be able to live that daily? How would you model that?
There's always a sunshine on the end of the way. At the end of a rainstorm, we believe there's always a sunshine, no matter what. His teachings have taught us there's a better way to solve things than physical violence. But to be able to do that, we must respect others. We gotta respect others. Then we will sit down, have a conversation to look at it at a different perspective. That way we can find an agreement and let go of that conflict. But there's always a better way to solve things. It's better than having to use physical violence or any weapons, because that just only causes more issues.
I believe that we need, our country was built, and I say this, but it is part of history. Our country was built off of fear, and there's a lot of hate. We need to listen to each other. Once we listen, and we listen for understanding, we realize that we have more in common than we differ. One thing, and this has really been on my mind, that we have to think about is that at the end of the day, we're all Americans. United we stand, divided we fall. And so when we can truly live, and I hope and pray that it happens with my son's generation, where they have learned to see each other as people, as humans, because I think that's what it's going to have to take. We have a rough history, and our country doesn't like to talk about it. And until you guys know in therapy, right, when you have trauma, you talk it out. And so we carry this American trauma. And until we talk about it, we're not saying we're blaming people, but until we talk about it and address it, our elders are carrying this American trauma. And so it is truly going to be up to our young people who have lived, who have this lived experience, that they see each other as humans. And hopefully they can carry that baton and make this change in our country. As seeing people for people and helping us alleviate some of this hate that has built all of this violence and anger and just generational training. So until we listen to one another, until we see each other as humans and as equals, we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. And so until we can realize that as people and see each other as one, American, that's when we're going to be able to move forward and, get rid of some of this violence.
Before I give you the mic back, it's, I look across this room, this is the America that we ought to be working for so hard, because every one of you has, first of all, your own cultural backgrounds. And coming together, that's what America is all about. And even in our differences, there is unity. And I wish I could take a picture of what this room looks like, post it someplace, and say, this is the America that Dr. King dreamed of and wanted for, and that it is the dream that we ought to be working hard to achieve.
Thank you. Do we have time for additional questions? Yes. So one more question?
Most of us, does somebody have questions?
Does anyone have questions? Pertinent questions?
We were that good?
Yes. Comments? Yes.
Comments?
Comments, questions?
Any questions in the virtual
Yes.
space?
I have a question. I didn't live to ever see Dr. King personally, but such a living, breathing entity my entire growing up and life. Do we have heroes like that today? Do we need them?
Can you repeat the question for the audience, for the virtual?
Yes.
Yeah. Do we have heroes today like MLK?
Do we have here, the question from the audience is, do we have heroes today like Dr. Martin Luther King? And do we need heroes like Dr. Martin Luther King today?
One of the things, as I've been reflecting this past weekend, that I want to make sure that I get out is that since his passing, and now since we actually celebrate him, our people, many people don't realize how hated he was while he lived. We like to say that he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, but he feared his life. He feared and rightfully so, because they ultimately assassinated him. So when we say, do we have heroes like him? And during his time, he was a hero to a community, but he lived his life and his family's life in fear. So each one of us can be a hero like him. It just depends on, when it's time to stand up and say what other people are too scared to say. That's your moment to be Dr. King.
Amen.
Amen.
Seriously, I don't think we need to want to be Martin Luther King. We will want to be like him in a way that will sacrifice his strong religious beliefs, his principles and values. That's what we ought to be achieving. And there are heroes in our community. They may not have achieved the esteem of a Dr. Martin Luther King, but there are lots of women and men in this community who have become symbols of what's right, symbols for doing, making great sacrifice, being role models like Karen, because she's a great teacher and has always been. And it's people like her, people like this young man, and people like you in this audience and the audience listening, that you have something to give. Just be the best that you can be. Look for opportunities to serve and be an example of kindness, respect, humility, all of the words that are listed up on that bulletin board, because they all are reflections of who Martin Luther King was. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. And we have questions and comments from the audience. I have here Chief Operating Officer of Lutheran Services Florida, Mike Terrace.
Am I unmuted? Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Can you unmute it?
Yeah, we can hear you, Mike. Go ahead. Mike, you need to unmute yourself now.
Ah,
There you go.
that's my hero, Terry, who can tell me how to run this technology. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I had a problem with my foot this morning, but I do want to thank the panel because I thought you said some really insightful and extraordinary things that get folks thinking. And I want to reflect on one of the things that Dorothea said and kind of reflected by everybody was in terms of the hero. And she said, look to the audience and look at what you look like. And that is Martin Luther King's dream. And about how our kids are more likely to see that because the next generation, they too look at people as people, much more so, you know, and it's much less an issue. But I want to answer that question about heroes because Martin Luther King, and I think you're absolutely right, was in many ways an ordinary man who had extraordinary abilities and did extraordinary things. And I think people like Dorothea, an ordinary woman who had extraordinary abilities, who has lived an extraordinary life of service, who has, in her own words, made it her mission to be a role model for the next generation to show them what success looks like. That to me is where Martin Luther King's dream is ordinary people making the best of the extraordinary abilities that the Lord gave them. And it can be different. Martin Luther King was an unbelievable speaker, but there are so many people that have different talents to be extraordinary people. You know, I addressed last year in the same audience like this. I was a fan of Bob Marley's. Here's a guy who was born into a single mom, was almost an orphan. Poor guy who grew up in one of the poorest countries in the world. And by the time he died, through his music, he was a religious guy, but by the time he died, not only did he change a country, he was instrumental and was a person who instigated peace in a country. But he sent this message out to the world that lives forever. He still has some songs that are regarded by people as some of the best songs ever written. That was a guy who came from nothing and impacted the world. And so if you're looking for heroes, look for ordinary people, the least among us, who have extraordinary abilities and do extraordinary things. And let's hope we have one young man just like that on our panel who will down the road do extraordinary things, and we'll all be looking to him saying, what a hero you are. But I thought the panel was really good today, and I appreciate all your insights. And Dorothy, I mean what I said about your life of service. Thank you for being here. And I did miss seeing you in person today, but I do thank everybody on the panel.
Southern Boston accent.
Mike, thank you for those kind words. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to take the liberty of taking the mic for just a second. And I'm just going to ask a few people around. I'm going to go back to your question of the heroes. And I think Mike hit it on the head that we can't be a Martin Luther King, but all of us can be something of some value. So I'm going to just ask a few of you to raise your hand about who is the hero in your life and why. What was the example that hero taught you along the way? So Okay, all right.
Yes, of course.
Yes,
And
sir.
just come up to the mic so that,
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, just so
Just
we're.
we'll pass it. Yeah, okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
for me, it was a gentleman named Tip O'Neill, a congressman from Massachusetts. My father was an AFL-CIO union negotiator in Boston. And I grew up, both my parents were immigrants my dad was from Poland, my mother was from Italy, Sicily. And, I remember the good old days when Tip O'Neill used to sit at my father's breakfast nook and talk about the things that we needed to do, go out in the community, help. And, my father was an incredible hero to me. Besides, don't mean to get emotional, but I do when I think about him because I do his work every day. I am my father's son. But Tip O'Neill taught me how important it was to go and help people that were less fortunate in the community. Black, white, green, yellow, didn't matter. Where I came from in Boston, we were all a family and we helped each other. So Tip O'Neill, I don't know if anybody remembers Tip O'Neill, but he was a staunch Democrat that my father was very close to, and he was a real hero to me. I always wanted to be a congressman. Unfortunately, I didn't get there, but
There's still time.
thank you for today.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Did you have something?
The floor is yours.
And then if you could just face the audience.
Face you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you. My name is Enid, and I was born in New Jersey. During the race riots, I was born in '59, so I was there to see a lot of things. Black Panther come through, burn down streets in Jersey, just tore it up. But my mom showed something. She's always tell us that we're the same as everyone else. We weren't there was no difference, okay? You brought somebody home, didn't matter what color they were, we're gonna play. She would says, okay, do your parents know you're here? But that was, it wasn't because you're this color or that color, you couldn't play. So, but the riots came through and I don't know who was beating this white guy to a pulp, but my mother grabbed him by the collar, pulled him in the house, bandaged him up, and then told him, we're gonna send you out the back of my grandmother's house, and this is the way you're gonna run, and do not turn around and look back. So that showed us that it didn't matter what color you were. Help, help, help. So that's how we were raised, brothers and sisters in the military. I didn't go in, but all of us served some type of way. I just did mine in the postal service, but that's another story. But when someone needs help, you just help. Don't stop because of the person's color. You help. It doesn't matter. You extend yourself to someone who is in need, and that's it. So that's what I was taught, and that's what I saw in my lifetime, and that's what I gave to my daughter also too.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience, for sharing. And I would like for our director to close us out with an introduction of our last speaker.
Well, thank you very much, panel and Marissa, you did a wonderful job, and thank you all very much for sharing your very insightful words. It was hard not to say there's a hero sitting right here. And they said, you? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. This building is named after you for a reason.
And I am so honored every time I think about it. And I call at least once a month just to hear them say, Dorita went extra.
And we have it written right there. This is how you should answer the phone, every phone. But there's power in the name. And you put power to the name by the work that you did. So that's why it's an honor for us to, there's a reason that there's 7 family resource centers, but only one of them has a name. And it's named after you for a reason. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dream Just Like Dr. King by Ava Parks. I have a dream just like Dr. King, of love and peace for everything. He dreamed we would all be free one day, to live, to laugh, to work and play. He said, I have a dream today, where kids of all colors can join and play. Where kids of all colors can join and play. He dreamed we would all hold hands as friends and work for love that never ends. My friends are kind, my friends are sweet. They make my world feel complete. We share and care, we laugh and sing. That's how we honor Dr. King. I have a dream, I'll say it too, to be kind within all I do. His dream lives in you and me, so let's make love and peace rare for all to see. All right.
And further questions? So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you virtually and, you know, you all that made that brave this Florida winter. It came out, but we truly do appreciate each and every one of you. And especially I want to say also to my fellow LSF employees, I know that we're not in this for the money, right? We're in it for the passion and we're in it for the work. So I would say continue to do exactly what you're doing, plus more, right? So that we can all continue to embody Dr. Martin Luther King and the work that we do already at LSF. So thank each and every one of you.
Thank you.